Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Garais. Um, right here, a lot of what we use here at ECPI, we use a lot of crash course. They're really nice and they're kind of entertaining. Well, crash course also has a psychology on personality disorders. This is a nice quick thing, and it's only like 11 minutes. So this is also good too, if you don't have this already in your course show. Well, by request, let's now go over your slideshows. So, what is your personality? It is the way you are, patterns of your behavior. How do you relate to yourself and your environment? And they're built on the way you perceive things, the way you look at the world. Remember, I told you there are people, optimists and pessimists, what kind of attitude, what kind of emotions you have. And typically, you're not typically aware of how you act because it's so ingrained, it's so natural. Like, um, like, let's give a classic example. My mother's very bossy because for 40 years she's the boss. She's been, head of staff, chief of staff, whatever title, and she's used to what? Being dominating and being the one in charge. So that's her personality, and it's not surprised that her perception and attitude and emotions are towards being, the alpha female in the room. Now, what are personality disorders? It's when these perceptions, attitudes, and emotions start affecting your life and also start affecting your relationships with others and the outside environments. I said facetiously during our last meeting last Thursday that those people with personality defects are, it's just and excuse my French, but it's actually the way my mother lectured it when she was at NYU. She was like, they're the assholes of the world, right? All of us who work in the real world and especially work retail, haven't you ever bumped into somebody that's just a jerk? And there's something just really weird about them. Like, why don't they just play along? For example, right? When everyone's at a meeting, everyone does the social laugh. Oh, you know, that fake laugh, right? I mean, it's not really funny, but you do it because it's part of the social contract. I don't want to make the person who made the joke feel bad, and nor do I. I also want to be part of the group, right? So that is a normal behavior pattern. But if you have a personality disorder, you have an impairment of a part of your personality and the way you actually function in the real world. Sometimes they can be maladaptive, meaning they cause harm to you and others. Also, an identity problem, and we'll talk about that, right? And it'll definitely lead to dysfunctional relationships. Of course, negative behavior, anger, hostility, all of these things. We all have these things, but when we're in public, we kind of control it. Remember, we just talked about in the last chapter, the id, the superego, and the ego. They all should be in balance. But there are some people, their desires, their id, is greater than a morality uh, or the rules of society, right? You may watch videos. My daughter's one of both my older daughters, um, the 27-year-old and the 16-year-old, love watching videos when people go, you know you know go go off and do crazy things like exhibitionism, right? Entitlement, right? Like when cops pull people over, I love when people say, "Do you know who I am?" Right? Also, these people are very insecure, or eccentric perceptions like he goes, "Hey, do you know who controls the government?" And you're like, "Well, I don't know." So that's what dysfunctional personality traits are. And for many people, they're just jerks. But for a lot of people, it gets them into a lot of trouble with society in general. So they come in clusters or these little groups: paranoid, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal. That's cluster A. Cluster B, erratic or dramatic behavior, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic. Cluster C, avoidant, dependent, obsessive. So we're going to go into those things. So, um, we will in a second, right? Other clusters, this is the other that doesn't fit in those three clusters. So depressive behavior and passive aggressive. Now, again, right? This is relatively common. A lot of people have these problems, and in different levels, right? And many of them, because they're jerks, they're treatment resistant, they're not compliant, and especially the paranoid personality. No, doc, you're just here to make money. When I'm not charging you, right? When I was a resident, I'm like, I'm not charging you. And the behavior is, it's just, their personality is just it's just hard to get along, right? And there's a incidence that is higher in lower socioeconomic groups, and we're going to tell you why. Well, let me give you a little hint, right? Like if you see some of these personality groups, right? Many don't have. If you're in lower socioeconomic, right? Do you have higher academic conversations? You won't. And then also, if you're in lower socioeconomic groups, you tend to hang out not only in your job but in your personal life with similar people with similar interests. Right. So now it's also interaction. There are some hereditary dispositions. Remember, um, the American Psychiatric Association has evidence that 40% of behaviors are inherited. But there's also what? Biological theories, harm avoidance. We already talked about that last term. Some people act tough because they feel they've been hurt before. Novelty seeking. I want to have a new experience, so I'm going to act differently, right? And reward dependence. And people like for example, people who are narcissistic and attention seeker, their reward is what? People now are looking at me, whether negatively or positively, and these things persist, right? And this last psychodynamic theory is these people have issues with being responsible, right? And they have issues with cooperating because they don't want to do what society kind of dictates them to do. And self-transcendence is, um, in, um, I really got to look that up, to be honest with you. I have to, um, not too familiar with self-transcendence. But you could see psychodynamic means what? Your mind and the movement of your mind. And I mentioned cooperativeness and self-directedness, right? Many of these clients do not believe they're responsible. Like, have you ever met somebody who's just a jerk and he says, well, the problem is the world, it isn't me, right? I get arrested all the time because of these dirty cops. It's not because I break the law, right? Or you ever hear somebody, this is a common one. Oh, they're all stupid. Everyone's stupid except you. I'm the smartest person in the room. That kind of thing. But self-transcendence, you should look that up. I'm not too familiar with that. So, of course, personality is based on your ethnicity, right? Cultural, which is it's related to ethnicity, right? But also culture, especially it's especially one thing I noticed coming from a non-optimal environment to a to now living in a pretty good environment. The one thing I noticed about the lower socioeconomic world is that they're really hard to shake off cultural bias. The things that they're born with, they keep with. And same thing with the social background. They're very intractable about letting it go. You know, um, that's why every time I go back to the Bronx or I go back to North Bergen County in New Jersey, the people there still act the same, and their complaint of me is, "Oh, you're now bougie or bourgeois. You're now a rich kid, so you can't identify with us." No, I'm the same person, but then in another way, I'm not because now I've seen other parts of the world, right? They have defensive behavior. There's also language barriers in the lower socioeconomic group, right? Um, you know how people refuse to say ask. They have to use, street language like ax. Let me ask you something, right? Not something, something, right? My wife says it's very funny when I go back to New Jersey. She says your New York accent starts coming out, and you start talking like that. Start talking all tough like that. And I find it funny because it's kind of true. There's also religious and spiritual release, dependent behavior, and avoidant behavior. Avoidant behavior, remember we talked about the human mind likes to be comfortable, so it tries to avoid uncomfortable things. Cultural value of work and productivity depends on different cultures and different age groups. Maybe you've heard that. Do you notice that baby boomers look at work a certain way? Gen Xers look at work a certain way. It's not necessarily that the new generation is lazy. It's just that they don't put a cultural value. They don't see work as productivity or work as life. I was taught work until you're blind, right? But then as I grew older, I'm like, you got to take that with a grain of salt. And also general roles and behaviors. And now, many of the gender roles have been switched around and moved around. Another classic example is in the Philippines. Men are no longer the breadwinner. It's the women who go out and work, and the men typically stay home and take care of the kids, right? Dave Chappelle did a lovely bit on one of his comedy specials, and he was alluding to the the I read it on some articles, some sociological articles called the feminization of the Asian male. Because if the Asian males are taking care of the kids, they're going to act more like what? Like your traditional female role, or what we thought in our social context was the traditional role, right? So these are some cultural considerations, some things to think about. And remember, cultural is not necessarily, where you're from. It's also where you're at. Um, and it could be by the time frame you were born or where you were born, right? Take a good look at Bronx, New York, 1970. Very different place. I look at it now, it's totally different. So the cultural context and the social background of that same area is very different. Discussing personality disorders, determine treatment resistance is lack of response. No, that's not true. Remember what I stated is it's the fact that it's difficult to, because remember when we defined personality, it's ingrained, right? So culture and who you are is very hard to change, even if you want to. And that's what treatment resistant means. Like there's no magic pill, there's no pill for every ill, there's no one drug that can turn it around, even if the client wants to. Now, you could use psychopharmacology, And depending on the symptoms, right? You could try to stabilize their mood, calm their anxiety, calm their aggression, right? Calm down their thoughts, cognitive, especially the cognitive and perceptual distortions. Individual and group psychotherapy, I'm big on that. I love that, right? And positive self-talk. I never told you guys about a very good friend of mine, Dr. Janet Barber. Her doctorate came in something called positive psychology. And I met her at another university. And I kind of, when I was talking to her, I kind of like shoot her. And academically, I'm like, your doctorate psychology. And he goes, why did you choose positive psychology? And the way I said it kind of ticked her off. And she was like, you got a problem with it? And I go, and I didn't know much about psychology. And I admitted that I didn't know that much. So I stated like, goes, what? I think positive thoughts and only good things will happen? No. And that's not what positive self-talk is. Hello, this is a private screening, private video. Can you kindly log off? So what positive self-talk is that, of course, if you are going to, you have negative talk, you're going to have negative thoughts, right? And remember, some of the problems of the personality is part of how you think. And what positive psychology does is forcing you to start looking because to start looking at the different perspective, and then you will see how looking at the different perspectives, like we all know, it's so easy. All it takes is you could be in a great mood when someone says, "Hey, great shoes," right? And you're like, "Yeah, oh yeah, they're dope. Like them, right?" But then all it takes is for one person to go, "Ooh, why are you wearing that?" And then it ruins all the good things. So what positive psychology is actually training yourself to start remembering or start focusing on the positive self-talk. And that's what group therapy, psychotherapy can do, right? Good group therapy can do, right? Clinical picture, use of projection. Hmm. What do we do with paranoid, right? They're afraid. They believe that the authority figure, and it's almost always FBI and CIA and federal government, right? It's very difficult to deal with them. So you have to deal with them professionally and academically, right? And since they don't like authority figure, you coming at them with authority, right? So um, the client has to be involved, and you can't just shoo away the client's side. Like, for example, Dr. Garais, I believe they're bugging us right now. There are listening devices in this room. So, right, try to validate that idea, right? And get together with your client. Okay, he goes, if you believe that, like, where's your evidence? I'm not saying you're wrong, but change my mind. Do you see how that turns into a topic of conversation? And let the paranoid personality find out that maybe not all of this stuff is true. Schizoid, social detachment. They have constricted affect. They have actually very blunted affect, little emotion, right? And in their mind, ooh, a lot of secret fantasies, right? They're like, Nelson, you want some cake? And then in my mind, I'm the king, Nelson. I order you to give me cake. And then I'll say, no, thank you. I'm good. And then I'll go back to my cubicle. Okay. Now your focus, of course, is to what? Little by little, right? Have them to relate with you, bring them into the group. But again, I'm more about slow and steady, because throwing people into the fire never really works. Schizotypal or schizotypal personality disorder. Interpersonal deficits, cognitive or perceptual disorder, behavioral eccentricities. Schizotypal, how's this? Weirdos, and they act like they're autistic, like a very very bizarre set of social skills, right? Ever have somebody like be really awkward with you, right? The way also to deal with your autistic patient is what? Self-care, social skills. Practice the routines of hello, good afternoon, right? And then have daily routines. Oh, I get the mail, and then I do what? I say hello to my neighbor, right? And of course, therapy to let out those unusual beliefs, and the weird thinking. But schizotypal, I think the best way to put it, they're weirdos. You've met them. They look odd. They look very odd, and the way they behave is very, very contradictive to what's going on, and they see the world very differently. Antisocial. Now, antisocial doesn't mean that they don't like to socialize. No, many of them do. But antisocial means there are a set of generalized rules of life, right? For example, do I just go backstabbing my neighbor just for the sake of it, right? Or do I throw my coworker underneath the bus just for the sake of it, right? Do I lie to people? Have you ever met a habitual liar? My sister's roommate was that. She used to walk around going, like, if you were interested in skateboarding, at the time I was a skateboarder, and she used to go, I met Tony Hawk. Have you met Tony Hawk? Yeah. You want his phone number? I have his phone number. Now, these people, they can have a history of abuse and cruelty, right? Because these people did not learn the rules on how to be with other people. Like, you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't backstab people. You shouldn't manipulate people, right? They're 2, 3, 4 faced. Their mood and effect, they're very, very charismatic. This kind of person, especially if they're good looking, they manipulate people to make them do stuff. I went to Fordham University. A lot of people who went there are actors and actresses. I had an ex-girlfriend who, and she's ex because she just used the way she looked to get stuff all day. It was really, really hard to watch, right? And of course, had a very narrowed world of view. She probably had an antisocial personality a little bit, now that I think about it. Like, only beautiful people count. Only smart people count. Since I wasn't beautiful, but I was smart, so I count, but only for a little while, right? And some of them are pretty smart because they also read people very well because they're really good at being charismatic, manipulative, and deceitful. Drug addicts are very good at having an antisocial personality. They have a disregard for the rights of others. So they can hurt you, they can kill you easily. But it goes, it has to be in something in their benefit. Next, antisocial. Oh yeah, they have absolutely no morals or ethics. Actually, that's kind of what I loved about my ex-girlfriend, but that's beside the point. 20-year-old Nelson, not too bright. And may have been impaired judgment. Oh yeah, and if you've ever met an actress, they're very confident on the outside, but this girl used to cry a lot about everything. Oh, also came from a broken home. Mommy and daddy were rich and didn't want to deal with her, so she lived at her grandma's. Then her grandma didn't want to deal with her. Then she lived at her aunt's for a little while. And they exploit people. They use people. My fraternity brothers hated her because she was easy on the eyes and she knew it. And she had a lot of false modesty too, which is also another antisocial thing. They're your fakest of friends. They are your frenemy, right? Now, you try to promote responsible behavior. You set limits and confrontation. Now, be careful with confrontation. It's been always warned to me, especially with psychotic personalities. Be careful, right? I remember they used to always say the only people who should do confrontation is the psychologist and the psychiatrist, right? Control of emotions, but limit setting is big, right? You can't do this. You can't do that. It's wrong doing this. It's wrong doing that. Why? Because it is. Um, which behavior, of course, is what antisocial personality is manipulation. Borderline. Ooh, I love this. Unstable interpersonal relationship, self-image, and they're very impulsive, right? They may have parental issues, maybe from a broken home, and by broken home I mean I don't mean it to be a stereotype, but it's where it didn't have solid roles uh, of a father parental figure and a maternal parental figure, and more than one person showing the child what to do and how to live life, right? And even if you did have both parents, if both parents aren't doing it, then it'll lead to the same dysfunction. Now they can be weirdos, they can look weird because they can be impulsive. They have what they call dysphoric. That means what? It is abnormal. Their mood will swing, and what comes out may not be congruent with what's ever in their head. They have dissociative episodes, meaning like their mood and effect and their thought processes won't match. Like, of course, if you're angry, you'll do angry things. If you're sad, you'll do sad things. But the borderline personality won't do either. Um, they're oriented to reality, but if they could have psychotic symptoms. They of course have impaired judgment, very unstable view of themselves because they don't know who they are, right? And they're loners, but um, they might be in a social group, but not really in, right? Or might have self-social isolation. But one thing about borderline personality, a lot of them go to jail because they're reckless. Like one minute, like I'm sad. Next minute it goes, I'm gonna rob a jewelry store. Have you ever robbed a jewelry store? Nope. First time for anything. YOLO. And then they do something psychotic. All right. So it's that. Um, Safety, therapeutic. Again, boundaries, because can these people become psychotic? Can these people commit crimes? Yes, they can. Can they go off on go on a rant? Yes, because they can lose it. They're going to have communication problems, coping, and everybody has coping and emotional control problems, right? Okay. Histrionic. Oh, I love histrionic, even though it's kind of like a misnomer. But excessive emotionality, and they call it's an old word because you get a hysterectomy, you're removing your uterus, and it's an old personality term from like the 50s. These crazy women. No, it just means excessive emotionality for attention seeking. And we all know there's a whole bunch of males in our lives who do this. There's a whole bunch of females in our lives who do this. Histrionic personality, it's just like the narcissistic personality, but it's all about um attention seeking, just like the narcissistic. It's but the big thing about histrionic is it'll be excessive emotionality. Like, like I had a student a couple terms ago. I go, hey, why'd you miss your lab? You know, my aunt's cousin, sister's brother's neighbor, had cancer, and it affected me so much. And she started crying in front of me and in front of the class. Now the whole class is looking at me, looking at her, and she's trying to get a closest of relationship so she can get a, so I'll take away the 30% deduction on late. But it's insincere and it's in shallow. And when I told her, I'm sorry, I can't do that. What happened? The tears dried up, everything dried up, and then she got all crabby and went, he goes, he goes, why did I even explain it to you? And then went back to her seat. I'm like, yikes, wow, right? So you can kind of show them, right? And that, that you can react without doing what? The whole drama queen thing. So narcissistic and histrionic is similar, but the histrionic loves that emotionality, right? Like I stubbed my toe. I love it. Now, narcissistic, right, is related, is kind of, but narcissistic is more about grandiosity. I'm seeking attention because I want to be loved. Ah, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeVille. I'm ready for stardom. They have lack of empathy. They really wouldn't give two feces about the neighbor. They're very arrogant. Do you know who I am? But inside, they're fragile. They have a vulnerable self-esteem, and they're very ambitious. They're social climbers, right? Oh, and here's the fun part, right? The histrionic won't avoid a big emotion like anger, but the narcissistic, not, what do you call that? I don't know why this self-awareness skills to avoid anger, right, and frustration, but you got to try to bring them back down to earth a little bit, right? Oh, they always think they're the smartest person in the room, right? And then goes, well, me and my education. He goes, I took some nursing classes. Then why didn't you finish? Oh, it's politics. As if a student is even remotely related to any of the politics inside any university, right? Um, and that's an example. Avoidant. I have low self-esteem. I am so protective on negative situations that I do what? I just avoid them. A lot of avoidant personality disorders even regress into, not regress, but descend and get worse into agoraphobia, which is a fear of like going outside. These people, and nowadays you can have a job that's online. You can do everything online. If you ever watched the movie, what is it? The Whale. Wow, very powerful acting, and you can see a lot of these personality disorders in a lot of the characters. Dependent, of course, you know, the youngest child syndrome, they're the babies, right? Need to be taken care of. Clingy, it's easy. Obsessive compulsive, we already talked about. Client with avoidant typically likes to be a center of attention, of course, false. Narcissistic and histrionic like to be the center of attention. Age-related personality disorders, right? Of course, we all know teenagers, the worst. No, you know what's worse than teenagers? Tweens, right? I am blessed because I didn't have that with my younger children. But Chanel, when she was 16, oh my God, the biggest narcissist I've ever known, right? But they're what? They're going through a lot of hormonal changes. So, hello, is somebody there? This is a private recording. Kindly log off. right? So personality disorders can be age related, and of course, when you get older, can any of these personality disorders that didn't affect you when you were younger can make you worse? Can you be that grumpy old man or grumpy old lady? My 16-year-old said, "Papa, you're turning into the guy who starts screaming at all the neighborhood kids, 'Get off my lawn!'" Right? And a lot of these negative thoughts and these things could be is also a higher risk for depression, suicide, and of course dementia. Right? Mental health promotion, self-awareness issues. You guys can read that part. And I think that's all we got for our mental health for this chapter, which is chapter 18. If you have any questions, you can sign up for my tutoring. And good luck, guys. Bring up that grade. And I'll see you when I see you.